Hi, this is Alicia with another Heuristic Podcast, and today we're talking to John Swanson. He's a client partner at Philips, and he's also a management consultant who specializes in mergers and acquisitions, business transformations, and competitive insights. I find him to be a very, very strategic thinker, and I always enjoy our conversations. Anything you'd like to add to that, John?
Thank you, Alicia. I appreciate that. In case anybody's interested, some of the companies that I worked for were GE Healthcare, Hollister, Deloitte, and Accenture. So it was with those firms that I gained most of my experience.
Yeah, well, those are all well-known names. I think that everybody will have heard of, and they also have a track record of finding and hiring really excellent people. So there you go.
I met a lot of really good people there. Yeah.
That's how we learn, from being around other great people.
No question.
Yeah. So the heuristic that I wanted to talk about today is, when making changes, always talk to people with skin in the game. And the reason why I wanted to take that down is because it's so very easy, because I very often am working with smaller organizations. So it's going to be really interesting to hear your perspective more from the larger corporate setting. That the impetus is to come up with a decision up at the high levels and then kind of force it down without really talking to people who are impacted by the change. And that's often a little bit backwards, or maybe not quite the full story. And so that's why I wrote that heuristic. I guess, what do you think of when you see those words?
It's everywhere. And it happens in all kinds of different functions, and I think it shows up the most in leadership. Mm-hmm. But it clearly shows up in a lot of the marketing functions, or maybe even HR in certain times, where the marketing functions where I've seen it play out is really not talking to their audience. If you're in a global marketing role, and let's say your company competes in 50, 70 countries, mm-hmm. and you put together a new global marketing campaign, and that'd be photography, it's copy, it's value propositions, it's describing the products, and the ones that fail, the ones that don't get buy-in from others, and certainly the larger countries that you need to be successful in, is when they haven't talked to the people first. The people that have to execute the plan, that have to execute the strategy, and accept the decisions made around value propositions, around describing the products, around the types of models used, around the family situations of the products, and settings that they're in. And I've seen a few crash and burns at the expense of the executives that were rolling out something globally and never really got the requirements or talked to the people in the countries.
Well, you do have to share a little bit of a crash and burn story for us.
That was a crash and burn story at one of the companies. I'll keep the names to protect the innocent.
That's right.
But it was a hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in, and it was that kind of like what you opened with, the brilliant idea at headquarters, if you will, or at the main office, and the group of 4 or 5 people wind up confirming with each other that they like the idea, and they go ahead and spent all that money, and then when they first take it over to the second biggest market, which is typically France, the UK, one of the China nowadays, one of the second biggest markets, and you find out that the color's wrong. That you can't launch that color in China because white means funerals, right? And things like that catch it, the U.S. marketers by surprise. Or I've seen it come the other way too, on the European marketers that look at the United States as when they live in the UK and they can drive from side to side in about 5 or 6 hours, and then they understate the size of the United States, and think that we're homogeneous when just get someone from Texas drawl and New Jersey accent together, and you see they can't talk to each other very well either, right?
No, that would be difficult. Like I've seen this issue come up, and I think, what do they call that? Localization of websites. So I used to work at a company, and we sold, while it was US based, we sold, it's B2C, so everywhere, and we discovered some of these little things, even just sort of the aesthetic, whereas the CEO
absolutely.
had a very simple, clean aesthetic, and apparently if you have a website in China and it's simple and clean, it looks like you're not very credible, because
yeah, there's a marked difference between website design, like Alibaba versus Amazon is completely different.
Yeah. And I guess there's also the tried and true business school case study, the Nova. I forget. I mean, I don't know, but maybe I was in business school at a different time than you.
I was thinking from another example of just really not understanding your surroundings and not appreciating the people that work for you, or their opinions or their thoughts or that. And I think, going back to maybe the leadership case, I was at GE Healthcare for 14 years. I saw some leaders that went to other businesses, and especially in kind of the 2000s, there were an awful lot of GE leaders that went to Motorola, that went to other really strong brand names in these CEO kind of roles, or COO kind of roles, and they started to implement policies that were more reflective of a GE policy, and they had none of the underlying infrastructure, and certainly not the multiple years of training that everybody at GE had, right, to talk to each other and their vocabulary, and some of those personnel policies, like the bottom 10% in every department go each year, right? And some of the people that I knew at Motorola, it was just one of the cases that was close to me that overlapped with me. And there was a group of 8, 2050 type thinking PhD guys on wireless connectivity and, cell phones and things. And the manager of that department is looking at them going, one of your guys has to go. He's like, it takes me 3 years to recruit somebody. I mean, I can't let anybody go. There is no such thing as the bottom 10% of these 8 individuals. So it's that force fitting. I think it falls into the same category of force fitting, just, a global kind of policy that, without thinking about the right exceptions.
Yeah. I mean, I see that a lot. This happens a lot in human resources, and I work very hard to try and prevent that. For every solution is first a hypothesis and what worked over here. And this is, I'm sure this happens in large corporate too, but in a smaller business, especially if you're a consultant working across multiple different clients, you see it in stark relief. Just because this one method for solving this particular kind of problem worked over here, it's not going to be exactly the same over there. It might be a good starting point. But back to the skin in the game thing, it's like it's not for HR to tell business leaders exactly what they should do. Really, what I like to say is like the HR in terms of the performance of the team. That's the accountability of that manager, of that leader. It's not HR's accountability.
Yeah.
So HR shouldn't be sticking their nose in it. Yeah.
That's a great point. I mean, from an HR perspective, the best HR leaders that I dealt with, what comes to mind is that Stephen Covey 7 Habits and the seek first to understand, and less of understanding, is this guy a good leader or not, but more about what is the team saying that he does that works or she does that works. and how can I do more of that, and what are they saying that doesn't work so well, and how can I help coach them through that? And I think that's the whole seeking first to understand, which I think falls right into this, skin in the game heuristic. I guess the second half of that with skin in the game, I think, speaks to the incentives, right? And it's in their best interest, obviously, to have a good review or a good relationship or a good understanding, of their strengths and weaknesses with their boss and their boss's strengths and weaknesses. I see an awful lot of press lately of kind of in the if I don't like it, cancel culture kind of approach, right? That you see in a bunch of popular press, and it's always the manager's fault or it's always the leader's fault. And I don't know that the employees are doing that same balance of their own skin in the game and their own incentives, because they have an incentive to have a great relationship with their boss, right? I mean, there's lots of downsides happen when all of a sudden your boss thinks you just hate them, right? Or don't like them or don't want to talk to them, and it's not the relationship you want to have with them.
Yeah,
I don't think. Yeah.
No, well, I mean, we'll circle back around to this, but it really does boil down to, am I taking, sort of an accountability mindset, or am I taking, a victim mindset, right? But, one of the things that's so important too, and that knowing how to take an accountability mindset is knowing what you're accountable for. And that manager, and some managers haven't been taught this way, but that manager is responsible for the collective output and the performance of their teams. It should be, but maybe in some organizations that political wins become a little bit more of the deciding factor. But if it's really working well, you, as the manager, want your team to be in a position to perform at their best. And that means them also understanding what it is that they're accountable for and being there to help them and give them guidance and give them the kind of feedback that they need in order to perform and demonstrate that you believe that they can do it. Now, if they again turn around and say, like, I don't want your help, and I think, in fact, that you're part of the problem, that resolves itself eventually. But I guess some managers have to. It's a tricky situation right now, especially when HR gets involved.
Yeah. Because all of a sudden, kind of some shields go up and some guards go up. I mean, it's essentially. I mean, in this, skin in the game heuristic and the incentives and the trade-offs that you're making. It's why I've always loved mergers and acquisitions. Yeah. I'd say that I've been involved in 23 to 25 or so different transactions, buying, selling, joining together, joint ventures. And the time with which you have to make decisions on leadership, to make decisions on staff, right? And, if you have 20 people on this side and 15 people on this side, and, you don't need 35 when you put them together, right? You need 30. Who are those 5, and how do we go about making those decisions? And, what leaders do you listen to? Because you don't have a leader of the new department yet, right? So you're evaluating the leaders there first. And I think you can see, I'd say over 90% of the time, the performance person wins over the political person in the new positions in the merged firms, because it's the time where I think it's very time sensitive, and timeline is driving the closing date and the rest of that goes with it. But the thoughtfulness that goes into the leadership in those roles is much more performance based, which goes into this heuristic of who really knows their business, who really knows the market. And as soon as I talk to a leader, and you talk to the 2 guys that are the VPs of supply chain or what have you, right? And then right away when you go and ask their people something they said and whether they roll their eyes or not.
Okay.
It tells you, right, really quickly, somebody that speaks a good game and somebody that actually walks a good game and implements the policies or procedures in the staff motivation things that they talk about. So it's M&A is great for this heuristic in examples of
it burns off the fluff, right?
yeah, and there's no time. And the political operator that might usually have gone to the CEO, that CEO might be the guy that's retiring. So they don't have their cover anymore there. And so what I've always liked about M&A is the ability to get the, at least the talent side of it and the performers into the right roles and building the right teams that way.
So you mentioned talking to their teams, talking to the two VPs of whatever. Like, how do you go about it? Do you have a process by which you try and discern who's the best fit for the go forward organization? What sorts of heuristics are you using mentally to sort that out? I'm really curious.
Well, in consulting, you get a lot more of the decision when you're in industry, right? I get to kind of make some of those decisions. When you're in consulting, you're putting together recommendations and you're giving feedback to a CEO or a CEO and the Chief Human Resources Officer, right, or what have you. And you have to design the new organization before they know who has the position. And so we'll have a series of workshops and a series of one-on-ones and two-on-ones where, I'd have the leads of two functions, marketing, sales, supply chain, at the table with me. And we'd be walking through the integration plan because, we got to be able to build customers on the day that it's official. Right. And how are we going to build customers and how's that going to work? So IT, CIO is the same thing. And a large part of the feedback to the integration committee and the chairman in that has to do with how well they cooperated, how much they contributed, right? And whether they cared that, if all they cared about was I get the job or I don't get the job, instead of I'm going to make sure the company is set, and the capabilities are in place, and I'm going to do my best to make sure that this closes on time and that it doesn't create, the systems all don't go down on day one, right? Those kind of things. And that also tells you that they know their system, they know their business, they know their market, So that's a large part, I think, is how well they contribute in a time of uncertainty.
Yeah, well, that's a good way to suss out the true capability. If they don't seem to have anything to offer in terms of how do we carry this forward in sort of a new context, then that's gonna shine some light.
On the sales side, what's the bonus commission structure, right? And what sales leaders are critical that we have to keep, on both sides, right? Regardless of whether we have a position for them, then we might not know the organization design yet, but how well they engage in that process and help to get to what the new structure is going to be, or how it's going to be managed, how the transition is going to be managed, and the thoughtfulness and the engagement there, is really going to help them to say this is the guy they want to keep around, right? Yeah. Or either way, right? Yeah.
The industries you've been in are probably a lot more guys and gals. but guys generally, generally speaking, assuming one's from the Midwest.
Oh, sorry. Did you have another question? I was going to say that.
Well, I always have questions. Yeah.
You had mentioned the theories and philosophies, if you will, right? Of specifically this skin in the game. And after I read through that chapter, probably the very first thing that came to my mind was game theory and the Nash equilibrium, right? It was that Russell Crowe movie, right?
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Okay. Oh, you haven't?
I'll have to see that. I'll write it down.
Great movie. And game theory in its essence is essentially skin in the game. There are different strategies for your transactions with a customer, let's say, all right? And there's transactional strategies where you get everything you can, right? The used car salesman, or right, this guy's only going to buy from me once in 10 years, so I'm going to take everything I can. I don't care about the relationship with them. Versus, this is my strategic account. I've got a bunch of people calling on that account. I'm going to do business with this account for 50 years to come, right? I'm going to be long gone and they're still going to be doing business with us. And the strategy in the transactional for game theory is take all you can, right? It's hostile. And the strategy that is the best long-term strategy in all settings for building relationships is tit for tat.
That's right.
And that has to do with skin in the game, right?
Yes, it sure does.
and it goes both ways. And if we're going to partner, right? I'll give some sometimes, and you'll give some sometimes, right? And I recognize then that you have skin in the game. It's not me always giving, right?
That's
as the vendor, right?
Yeah. So like the prisoner's dilemma game theory. So I'm struggling to remember the book that I read several years ago about, it's like the emergence of cooperation, and that was really kind of what they discovered, that and I think the second thing that was really, really interesting that I learned from that book is that trust and cooperation emerge. It doesn't have to be created. So very often, another one of my little sayings is like, if you want to establish trust, first trust, which is just exactly in keeping with tit for tat. And what creates trust is that mutual gain, and then repeat exposure, repeat engagement. And it's unlike every 10 years I'm gonna screw this person over and get everything I can, knowing they're probably not going to come back for a long time anyway. And the reason why it emerges isn't out of some sort of like pure of heart motive. It's because it's best for each individual to at least first cooperate until somebody defects, I think it was the language, and then you zing them.
And there's a zing, right? It's not the world doesn't come to an end, right? The sun still comes up the next day, but there's going to be a response, right? And an appropriate response, measured and of the same level and caliber kind of response, and that keeps the relationship in check, right? Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, okay, I won't do that again. Or we escalate the relationship into non-existence, which I guess is the other one. But that does, I hadn't really made that connection, but that it makes perfect sense. And to me, this is skin in the game is really part and parcel of yet another one of my little sayings, which is speaking to the trust algorithm. And so two of those parts are accountability and authority. And if I'm accountable for particular outcomes, I'm exposed to the consequences of something, whether it's good or it's bad. And that must mean I must have the ability and the authority to make decisions that enable me to do that. If I'm in the situation where I'm held accountable for something, but I don't have the authority to make decisions, that's not good. And vice versa, if I have a lot of authority, but I'm not accountable for the outcomes, that's where you get moral hazard, and that's due to a lack of skin in the game, quite frankly.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's actually I have delegation written down here as well. And the training classes that I was in years ago was exactly this: authority and accountability. Right. And keep them somewhat in balance. And there was a balance thing that went, and that was the visual, right? That went with the balance for balancing authority and accountability, because leaders love to delegate accountability, not so much the authority to go along with it. And if you're walking out of the boss's office and you're fully accountable for delivering something, haven't been given any resource, or it's just in addition to what you're already doing, you need to stop before you cross that door, which is what our training was geared around. Turn back around and say, I'm going to be I can't think of, necessarily what the resources I'm going to need to deliver this are, but I'm going to go think about it a little bit, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to ask you to make sure that I get, some of the resources that I need to deliver this for you. I was on a call earlier this morning, and it was sales goals for next year, starting to get the 2022 sales plan together.
Yeah.
And one of the zones was behind in one of the product areas, and underperformed this year. And the initial target was a 10% increase over what their last year goal was next year. And so they missed. Say this is a classic example of there was no question or seeking to understand of what didn't work. There was just another desire to increase the goal from this current year, which wasn't achieved, And so the conversation on the call from some of the people that were going to be accountable was exactly revolving around, what are we going to get that's different? How are they investing in this business? What do we get? What different tools do we have? What different value propositions, what product launches, and what technologies? And it was all revolving around that, because they were realizing right from the start, they have the accountability and the skin in the game.
Yeah.
And they're not being handed the resources or the authority or the new tools to drive a different outcome.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. That's it's like some executive about 4 layers up sat down with a finance person.
Yeah.
Came up with the goals.
Yeah. Or I think in the first pass, it's mostly the finance people just throwing out,
Well, there's that
numbers.
too.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is it private equity owned?
Yeah. Then it's all numbers. Yeah.
Then it's all the numbers people.
Everything else is a distant second.
Yeah. Oh, I wish I could say I'd never seen that happen. But I have seen it. I have. I know we're running short on time right now, but your insights and I think examples have been really helpful. I mean, that's part of the issue is that heuristic is a very abstract notion, and without the stories to back it up, then what's it worth? So thank you first of all, and then is there anything else that you thought of or came up for you that you think would be helpful to share?
I think the last word I had kind of written down here on closing thought or whatever is I think it all goes into authenticity. And the last couple of years. Okay, I hope you have some good editing.
We'll work it out.
The leaders that understand the process, the market, the business, the teams, and granted, that takes a little bit of time to get your grounding and know your team and know where you stand and know how you're competing in the marketplace and your competitors and that. But I think what's wound into this skin in the game is also authentic leadership. Mm-hmm. and really kind of understanding what your teams are capable of, how much authority you can delegate to them, how much accountability they can take, and designing the right processes, or less process, more milestone, and driving towards outcomes, not activities. Don't manage the activities. Okay. Manage the result. Okay. And if you know that somebody is in a bit over their head or they're swimming out into some deep water, have some checkpoints with them to cover the risk, because delegation's a risk, right? If you're giving them accountability and authority, they're taking on some risk. And how can we help them in the parts where they're going to need it, and catch them in time before they implement the risk, right? Right. And all the risk comes from the action, not from thinking about it. I can think about it all day. Right. Yeah. The risk comes when they take that action. So if I know my business and my market and the team and the person well enough, I can make sure I'm supporting them before they take the action, and I can assess the risk of it as well and help them grow as a leader.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, because, it's not just do they have access to resources? Is kind of like, do they have the wherewithal? Do they have the experience? Do they have the skills? Do they have the capacity to even do this thing? And if not, if they're pretty close, then can they do it scaffolded and supported by somebody who maybe has, like you or their boss?
And then the next couple of times they do it, they get better at it, and then their experience scales. So it's definitely delegating based on the level of experience